and welcome to the IdeaCast interview series, episode 17. My guest today is Amy Edelstein, author, educator, and public speaker, as well as an important change maker. Amy is the founder and executive director of the Inner Strength Foundation, a nonprofit organization that supports youth development. And in this conversation, we will be talking to Amy about the Inner Strength Foundation and what it does, its purpose, and how it functions. We'll also talk to Amy about what inspired her to bring her to where she is with her work and in her life. And we also look into the future for Amy and for all of us. So thank you for joining us in this conversation, and I hope you enjoy it and find it rewarding. Thank you. I'd like to welcome Amy Edelstein to the IdeaCast interview series. I'm so grateful to have you on board, and I look forward to learning about your work with the Inner Strength Foundation and a whole bunch of other things. So welcome, and so glad to have you.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here.
Now, I have lots of beautiful questions for you, and I'd like to start with talking about you first, and going back to your formative years, because you work with teens and you work with adolescents and youth. And can you give us a little background in terms of finding mindfulness practice and transformative work, a little background on how you arrived to that and a little history?
I went to high school in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and was in a public school of about 2,000 students. So it ran the range of challenging classes and technical classes. It was a large school. Nobody really knew who I was, or, teachers were very uninvolved. And it was the 70s. The 70s were an earlier echo of, I think, the time we're living in. It was post 60s. There wasn't a lot of optimism. Everyone felt jaded after Watergate, felt like the government was lying to us, felt like Vietnam didn't end, felt like the civil rights movement had worked so hard and there was so much pain and not very many gains. Feminism was making its move and there was a lot of pushback. It was before the gay rights movement really took hold with the AIDS epidemic, and sadly in the next decade. So it was an interesting time. There was a lot of regrouping after the foment of the 60s and the optimism of the 60s. And you could see in the music was more dreamy, progressive rock. They weren't ballads that you could relate to or sing to. They were about these fantastical places, and funk was bringing that kind of heavy beat in and feeling like what's really happening. So I was in high school in the late 70s. And I was really searching for answers. I was searching for meaning. I was searching for a way to make sense out of life. I was searching for people who seemed to have a depth of character and a depth of wisdom. And they certainly weren't teachers in my high school. Pittsburgh was really a Midwestern city. It was not a progressive city at all. It's changed quite a bit in the decades since. Okay. But I found a couple books. So I found this great book, Richard Hittleman's 28-Day Guide to Yoga. It was one of those little paperback pocket books, because there was no internet. You couldn't search. You just found what you found in the used bookstore, whatever happened to be there. Richard Hittleman had a TV show out of LA where he was teaching housewives how to flatten their tummies while they vacuumed. I mean, it was a really sexist time still.
Yeah.
But he happened to be a very serious celibate disciple of a really well-known Indian teacher named Swami Chidananda, who is the disciple of another said to be very highly realized teacher named Swami Shivananda. Shivananda yoga in the Bahamas is something probably people know now, but there were about 12 master teachers. Swami Shivananda, and Swami Chidananda was one of them. He was still living. And this Richard Hittleman was a celibate disciple. But he had this LA gig where he was, translating into popular culture. So I felt something in his book. And so I followed the 28-day guide to yoga, and I was doing headstands, and then I was doing meditation. And then I found some other key books at the time, Be Here Now by Ram Dass, and Autobiography of a Yogi, Swami Yogananda, and Zen books. And I was writing a lot of poetry, reading the beats, and that was it. I just felt like there were paths, there were systems, there were people who knew, and it was possible to practice and to know as well. And that's what really I loved about the Eastern teachings, because I felt a call to head out on that ascetic path and find the answers myself. I was raised in a very liberal Judaic environment. I went to I studied Jewish philosophy and ethics for 5 years. So I was very also immersed in that side of Western spirituality and ethics and morals. But I found in what I was reading this sense of an immediacy of discovery of a way to live that was aligned with that sense of non-separation, non-duality of consciousness. So that was sort of the beginning of the end. I went to college at Cornell. I studied education, political theory, and regional development. Really, how do you build the structures of a culture to bring out individuals' higher potentials? And eventually, in the middle of my studies there, I went to Asia, and I stayed for 4 years and did a lot of deep retreat. And then I was one of a founding member of a meditation community where I lived for 27 years before moving to Philadelphia and starting my teen program. So my entire adult life has been about culture change, from reading and understanding structures of contemporary culture, how technology and politics and economics and environment play into that, as well as working with systems of individual transformation from the inside out.
Great formative years in terms of having an awareness of things beyond the utilitarian or the mundane or the classic Western paradigms of thinking and so forth. So that's amazing. And you mentioned Be Here Now, and I saw that on your website that you had Ram Dass. And it turns out in my, I think, sophomore year that I kept that Be Here Now in my backpack pretty much. It was my little Bible. And I initially found that book. My dad was dating a woman who was a psych major, so our bookshelf was full of all these really neat books. And so I came to that book because of initially he was talking a lot about psychedelics, and I was no stranger to them in high school. And so it shifted my trajectory a little bit away from that sort of lure into, the easy out on enlightenment by psychedelics. And it's not trying to beat up psychedelics, but it changed me so that I looked a little more in a better direction, I would say, overall. So, so you moved to Philadelphia, and you immediately started working to founding the Inner Strength Foundation, or how did that come to be? How did Inner Strength emerge or get put together?
I was really trying to figure out, after 35 years of writing, studying, interacting with different teachers and methods, doing a lot of retreat and dialogue process, and working closely with peers who were also interested in the same thing. Is really trying to figure out how to translate the best of what I'd learned to people who just don't have access. So Philadelphia is one of the 10 poorest large cities in America. Poverty in Philadelphia, of course, in America, Poverty levels are defined differently depending on cost of living. So poverty level in Philadelphia is defined as $24,000 a year for a family of 4.
Okay.
This is, I mean, we're talking deep poverty. We're talking
Right.
intergenerational poverty. We're talking, systems that have developed this profound gap between those who live a sustainable life and those who, even if they work two jobs, 18 hours a day, still do not live in a sustainable manner. And I find it a crime that a country as wealthy and educated as America is has allowed the system to perpetuate. Having lived in India and seen deep poverty, walking around Philadelphia and seeing some of the neighborhoods was just, it was just so painful. I just found it just on a human level, just unconscionable. So I was also a product of the public school system. So I grew up in public schools. My parents didn't have the money to send me to private school. I would never have pictured myself as one to go to a private school. And I feel that excellent education is part of a culture that's future oriented, that cares about quality of life. Right. So my desire was to translate all of the complicated philosophical tools that I had spent time learning about and experimenting with, what really helps transformation, as well as the meditation component. And of course, although I came to meditation in 1978 and I was a deep practitioner, there were others like John Kabat-Zinn and Richard Davidson and other people like that who have been working in the secular world to validate these tools through science. And so I was a real beneficiary of that. In 2014, I was able to use a lot of the research that had been done to explain the benefits of mindfulness tools for students, for focus, for calm, for self-regulation, for compassion, to reduce negative rumination, to reduce depression, to reduce self-harm, to help support students who've had trauma. And for me also, I was always very interested in teaching to wholeness and to teaching to teens are just curious, and whether they grow up in harsher conditions or more privileged conditions, the teen mind is designed to explore and experiment and discover and adventure and take risks in terms of ideas and imagine a different world. And that's what I did with practice. And that's what I did with the books that I found. So I really wanted to catapult their minds out of teen angst and into, and give them some unanswerable questions about the nature of being and who are we and when did we start? And if we're influenced by our brains that have been developing for 300 million years, and that's triggering us now, then did our existence really begin when we were born or when we were conceived? Or does it really begin in the evolutionary span of 300 million years that got our amygdalas to react the way they do? So you take questions like that don't have answers, and you give them to students and they love it. And it really has, I've seen, we do research on our program, and every year we see statistically significant improvement in self-compassion, self-regulation, and some other metrics for academic success and well-being. But I just see lives transformed. We've worked with 15,000 students at this point, and they get a weekly program for 3 months. So we've worked with a fair number of kids over time. And it's really amazing when you see a student who is just shrunk into themselves because of grief. They lost a caretaker and they're on their own, and they have younger siblings they have to deal with, and there's gun violence in their neighborhood, and they're only 13 or 14, and they're just kids, and they've got adult responsibilities on their shoulders. And you see them over the course of a couple months, start to become themselves again and start to be kids again and start to articulate that they're happy to be here because they had forgotten about these things and they didn't want to interact, and now they do. And you just see um, the creative potential coming back alive in them, and which of course it leads to happier lives, it leads to better communities, and it leads to better outcomes for our culture as a whole. So it's critical that we do this.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it's beautiful that and great that you can take them out of a convergent focus, have them the awareness tuned to a lot of ineffable propositions, and that to me, when you were saying that, I was like, wow, that gives you a sense of it's not only meaning in a sense that you're working on developing meaning, but you're also knowing that there's potential out there, and there are multiple potentials that can be realized. What year? What I'll put it in this, I guess, way. Your first graduating class, around what time was that? And then is there follow-up? So in other words, if you've worked with 15,000 students and some of them graduated 10, 12, or whatever years ago, are you getting feedback in their adult life or young adult life now?
My first students were juniors in 2014.
Okay.
So they graduated 2015. They graduated 2016 actually, and so they graduated high school. They graduated college a couple, last year.
Mm-hmm.
I don't stay in touch with them. I do sometimes run into them on the street. Of course, last year during the pandemic, I didn't see anyone and they weren't out. So anecdotally, a few of them that I've seen have told me that they're continuing to use the tools, but we don't have a way of staying in touch. Teenagers don't email.
Yeah.
They've
got more important things,
but they don't
right?
email.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah, so maybe they'll come around and as they get older and re-engage again. It's partly the reason why we just developed a mobile app so we could stay in touch with students through push notifications, and they'd stay in touch with us through the tools because we'd be on their phones. Otherwise, we didn't really have a way to follow them.
Right. And I suspect, and I'm in this process now, that when in 20 or 25 years, when they're in that reflective phase of life, AKA middle age, that you'll probably get these unexpected emails or whatever formats going on in 20 or 25 years. And I just hope I know it's going to be really rewarding and satisfying to get some reports back from people and say, you don't know how much. I mentioned the Ram Dass book, and I met a guy that same 1986, I was about a sophomore or something in high school, and or maybe a junior. And I met an artist named Lee Stone, same thing. We just had this conversation and he gave me a meditation tape, and I took it home at 16. And okay, and I've been seeking him out. He's still alive. And so I want to talk to him and say, thank you. Yeah, I'm in my 50s now and I appreciate what you did. So. Now you mentioned, and this is close to the feedback, the anecdotal evidence that you'll get from, or reports rather, that you'll get from the students, but you mentioned Syracuse was working with metrics, and is that ongoing? Is that a continuation with, or was it just a study that was done at one point?
It's both.
Okay.
We did a 3-year study in partnership with doctors Rachel Raza and Dessa Bergen-Seco, who are both in the field of studying the effects of contemplative practices, mindfulness practices on school students, both grade school and high school. So Dessa worked on the design of the study, and Rachel has been working with us. They both came down to Philadelphia to really get a sense of the program. So we had approvals. You have to get particular approvals for an official study. So we had a 3-year study done, and following that 3-year study, we have done internal surveys of the students. So we're using the same scales. So we're using what's called the ASRI, the Adolescent Self-Regulatory Index, and the NEF Self-Compassion Scale, and another one called the EPOC scale, just measures a couple different things,
Mm-hmm.
and so we study results every year. We're very interested in evidence-based results. The anecdotal results are beautiful and meaningful.
Right.
And those are the ones that come to you, or those are the students who write about what they learn. But when you're working with 4,000, 5,000 students a year, you really want to be sure that your program is overall having an impact. So we do continue to study, and we see really interesting things. We learn a lot from the data. We change our program accordingly. We found my core program is a 12 lesson program. And we found that when schools want to reduce it to 8, the impact just isn't as strong. They need that extra 4 weeks to really internalize the tools. We found if we follow up the next year with the same length program or half length program, the students do much better. We've learned different things from the data that have really helped us work with schools in a way that they can understand and justify the time that they're taking away from other pursuits, particularly academic pursuits, because they're kind of timed down to the minute by the districts in the state.
I'm sure. And on the parent side of things, do you have to get consent from a parent or a caregiver, and also what is the feedback you're getting from parents? Are they, again, with anecdote, are they expressing anything relating to their behavior at home and so forth?
We don't have a lot of contact with parents.
Okay.
Periodically, we'll do a presentation for the Home and School Association so they know what's happening. We don't need permission because we're embedded in an academic subject, and we include evolutionary development of the brain, how culture has changed over the last 800 years. There is a strong academic component. So it's not just a self-care practice.
Okay.
And we're also approved and recommended by the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, CASEL. And so it validates the program to be embedded in schools. Students do not have to, they're not required to do the meditation exercises if they don't want to. We're careful not to cross any religious lines so that Orthodox practitioners of Islam or evangelical Christians will feel comfortable with what we're doing. It's good that I have such a strong, world religions background, because if you don't know what religion is and what it isn't, or what you're transgressing, or how doing love and kindness practice could be against what certain sects of Christians believe, that only God can grant mercy and that we can supplicate for mercy. So you really have to understand the constructs in order to be able to allow students to opt out, to make bridges, and to make the program really fit in a public school setting in America. One of my schools there are only 600 kids, and they have students from 27 countries speaking 20 different languages. So there's really a lot to juggle when you're trying to accommodate, people's different religious beliefs and practices, which we respect and do. We're not trying to impose a certain philosophical system on students. We're trying to give them options and tools and put those in their hands so they can search themselves and empower themselves and help themselves discover and also heal from trauma.
Right. And from my looking at not only your website, but the Inner Strength Foundation website, it looks like it's set up to be easily exported or be transferable to other schools. And you work very well, and you have a podcast for teachers, and I was listening to some of your podcasts, and it's set. So I'm saying this, if there are people out in the audience that are in education, that this is really designed to be modular, and from my impression. So would you speak to that?
Sure. Thanks for bringing that up. The Conscious Classroom is the podcast. I publish pretty much twice a month, every 2 weeks. So that is really half-hour accessible commentary, reflection, but tools. They're always classroom tools, and either for the self-care of the teachers or for teachers to use with students. I do a teacher training, which is virtual, to teach the inner strength system, which is this method that I described of mindfulness tools embedded in context setting perspectives. So evolutionary neurobiology and the science of cultural change and how that's impacted the individual experience. So those are available at theconsciousclassroom.com. And our in-person work that I manage is all in Philadelphia. My goal was to reach a significant percentage of students over time so that we could actually change outcomes in the city. So students would graduate having learned more, with better, with higher aspirations for themselves, and having connected with their own innate creativities and passions, so that they would be better college students, entry-level employees, better parents, better, that we could really change culture by improving everyone's well-being. And that's the foundation. If you have people who have given up on life, or that life has been so unbelievably harsh that talking about resilience and grit is all, it sometimes avoids responsibility that we've allowed our culture to be so harsh.
Mm-hmm.
Next year, we're expanding. We're going to be working with 6 additional schools that have suffered the most from the increase in gun violence in Philadelphia, which is experiencing a 40% increase this year. So those high schools of 700 kids have lost 4 or more students in the past year to gun violence. That's heavy. It just, again, it's one of those things that there are economics behind it. There are all kinds of reasons behind it, but we shouldn't be in this situation where 14-year-olds are expecting to lose a friend or a peer or a classmate that year or the next year. And so I'm really, my passion is to reach as many as we can in a deep enough way so students really have access to meaning and purpose and self-care and self-love in the broadest sense, so that they really believe in themselves and can change outcomes. So that's where my focus is, and the teachers that I work with a dedicated group of instructors, but I do teacher training so that programs can spread elsewhere. And I am available to help school districts to work with I've worked with other school superintendents to help them think about how to embed this in their schools moving forward. Because the thing I haven't brought up is the pandemic has caused a huge disruption for adults as well as students. Kids are going back to school. Our district was all virtual since last March. So kids are going back to school after being out of school for 1.25 years. And that's a heavy lift. That's a heavy lift for a lot of reasons. And of course, that's happening not just in America, in countries all over in the world, but especially in America. And so these tools can help.
I can only imagine. And the fact that, when we look at the condition of the species, the fact that you're getting in there in a more proactive position to influence young minds, as well as help the young minds heal and as you said, process trauma in hopefully a better way, and giving them a tool to process trauma. That's just so valuable, because it's you could see it being cyclical, that if they go out into the world without being able to, in a healthy way, process what their youth and child and adolescent experiences were. This is just so valuable, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the IdeaCast, is to talk about this, because one of my concerns is where the species is going, and ways to do what you're doing, and persons like yourself. So can you speak to the emergence education? Is that a foundation separate from Inner Strength, or is that under the roof of Inner
No,
Strength?
it's a separate entity that I work on with Jeff Carrera, who is my partner in evolution and transformation, and also my husband. Oh, I'm so sorry.
No worries.
Yeah.
Little bells every now and then are fine.
Bells, trains going by.
Yeah, it's all good. I think I have birds in my background, so it's all good. It's all good. So he's a creative partner and partner
Yes,
in.
yes.
Okay.
So we publish books and courses, but mainly, to be honest, the Inner Strength is all consuming right now. I wish it were slightly less consuming, but it's growing, and I'm surrendering to its growth, because I sort of felt like it might be good to be slightly less busy and allow some younger people to take it over and move it on, but it's still growing. So that's happening. So emergence education is books, courses, meditation, philosophy, but it not related to the Inner Strength Foundation, except that it's built under the same roof.
Right, same actors. And the books, can we talk about your books? Because I think they are related to the Inner Strength and are good for folks who may want a primer first. That's the impression I got. So could you talk about your books?
Yeah. The Conscious Classroom is a book I wrote to really convey the philosophical principles and perspectives and passion behind the team program. It's not so much a how-to that you would read it and go, okay, now I can implement in my class, but it really actually is the more important how-to, which uplifts you into this more holistic perspective, where we're not seeing the world divided up into pieces, but we're able to in some way expand our consciousness and recognize this powerful interrelationship between all things. So from the particle physics perspective to a cosmological perspective, there are different approaches that I talk about in that book, which show interconnection and show non-separation and show the kind of potential that arises when we awaken to that level of non-separation. So when you start to see that everything is connected and everything is also moving constantly, it means that there's always possibility, and there's also possibility of punctuated development of emergence that arises when you're not quite sure in a linear sense how it got there. Mm-hmm. So that's what that book is. It includes a lot of stories from the classroom, a lot of student accounts of the students that have moved me so much. So it's really it's a fun read, and it did win an independent publishers award. So I'm quite proud of that. I was pleased.
Very nice.
And the other book is the Teaching Inner Strength, which is a teacher's manual. Okay. So that really lays out lesson plans for the Inner Strength program, the 12 lesson program, how to teach it, how to really divide up lesson by lesson. And it goes along with the teacher training, but people do use that without it. There are two other books I'm working on right now. One is sort of the next iteration of the Conscious Classroom, which I haven't begun yet, but I have it kind of outlined in my mind. So probably in the next year and a half, 12, 18 months. But I'm finishing, this is not related to Inner Strength, but I'm finishing a memoir called Adventure in Zanskar, which is, I'm really having fun. And I'm about I'm on my last read through, so I'm trying to birth it, and I just want it to be done already. But I'm about 10 days of writing away from having it done. In Adventure in Zanskar is a story of an almost 2-month trek that I made in Zanskar, which is in northern India. It's the westernmost part of the Tibetan plateau. And I went there in 1983 with just an Indian Army map and me, to walk and to meet the people and to reflect. And as part of my spiritual quest, it was in the middle of the 4 years I spent in living in India. So it's a travel log. It's cultural reflections on those people. It's a spiritual quest. I hope that readers enjoy it, and that's going to be out in August.
I think when you combine travel and exploring culture and geography with a biographical, framework there with your story, that's compelling and that's interesting.
Yeah.
I personally, I love reading people's adventures and sort of living vicariously and being inspired by that as well. So that's awesome. I'm so happy for you. Writing is such a beautiful and creative process. I jot things down and maybe I'll put something out someday, but I'm always, I always admire, and the majority of people I've interviewed in my series are authors and we talk about books. So if you do ever want to come on and talk about a book, we can hop on a call and anything forthcoming. And I'd love to cover that with you. Although you gave us a good thumbnail sketch of what your next adventure is. And so that's great. I know you're on a bit of a time budget. We've got probably about 15 to 20 minutes left. I would like to talk to you if you're good with it. You've been on a pretty good journey, 35, 37 years. You said early 80s, so we're quite a stretch of, not that time means a whole lot, but growth. And so let's talk to the audience. And if there are people who come to this interview, what kind of sage can you pass on in terms of, I know that you're working with adolescents and teenagers, but what could you do to somebody who's just starting to go through that process of realizing that there's something they need in life, or there's something that's necessary to a good medicine, let's say, to help them? Can you speak to the audience a little bit and just share some sage, if you will? If you're good with that, we can go to something else. If not,
No, I'm totally good with that.
Okay.
I think the first thing that popped to mind is never think that it's too late. So I started meditating in 1978 and I went to India in 1983. So I was 20 when I went to India, and I thought I was 10 years too late. I spent, half of the first year I was there just going, God, the real adventurers came in the 60s or the 70s, and there's, I'm too late. They all have found it, should I even bother? So it's never the wrong time. It's never the wrong time. When you feel that stirring and you feel that calling and you feel like, I want my life to matter and I want it to mean something and I want to be deeply happy, that's the right time. And just, all that nagging self-doubt that you missed it, you're in the wrong life, you should have started before, or given your past, you couldn't possibly, or somebody who told you that you didn't have any depth when you were, 18 and you believe them, or just let it all go, keep going, just let it all go. Those voices are going to be there. It doesn't matter. You just listen to, that calling. I had a friend when I was in my early days of seeking who was about 35 years older than me. And he had a very gruff voice. And he said to me once, he said, when I was doubting whether it was really worth doing all this, and he said, truth is not a democracy. And yeah. I thought that meant that all those voices in my head did not have equal say. They were not equally wise. They were not equally out for my own well-being. They were not equally useful. And I didn't have to give all those thoughts, like let's say 85% of the thoughts were negative about being on a quest. And, there were a couple that were somewhat encouraging. And then there was maybe one that said, this is the only thing that matters, that I didn't have to give everyone equal weight. And it was so liberating. I've never forgotten that. And that must have been 35, 38 years ago. So listen to those voices that support you, that encourage you, that make you curious. Find a book, read from chapter 6. You don't have to finish it if you're sick of it. If you don't like it, don't feel like there's something wrong with you. It's not the right book at the right time for you for any number of reasons. And seek out the teachers that have experience. So if you go to a teacher and you feel like they don't really know what they're talking about, because sort of everyone and their brother is teaching some kind of healing and transformation, and just because you've experienced trauma doesn't mean you can guide other people to heal from it. Just because you've had a spiritual realization doesn't mean that you're a good communicator for others. So trust yourself if you have doubts, even if there are 10,000 people in the room. It's not for you. Don't. We all we're very delicate. We open according to very, it's like a fragile mix of ingredients that help foster our higher human potential. And teachers can set you back. The wrong teacher, the wrong book, the wrong friend can definitely set you back. There's no reason. I'm not from the hard knocks school that you have to really suffer on the path to development. And I've had some great teachers, and I've had some teachers who should never have been teaching. So what I felt helped me grow most were those that really encouraged me with kindness and love. So the idea that we all need a Zen master with a strong stick might work for some people, but if that's not for you, don't worry about it. There are other systems in there.
And I think that's those are pearls of wisdom, because I've either been involved or outside watching the self-improvement and even the New Age movement since probably the early 90s. And you're right, there are it can be fatty. There's potential for self-deception on behalf of the seeker to, again, sort of align with something, but maybe with a little confirmation bias. So it's very, and one must be careful, I think. And you and I talked before we hit record, and I do want to reach out and work with folks and help folks. But what I do is just encourage inquiry. So, and healthy inquiry, and not burden anything with too much narrative or belief structure. But what you just said, I'm taking to heart, because I don't want to get out of bounds with anything. But I feel a motivation, and so maybe I'll counter with a sort of, there's a need almost for a democratization of the initiation of growth and seeking. But you're absolutely right. You need someone who is coming from the right place and the right space to teach the deeper work and the more meaningful work. But we can certainly all encourage each other to take care of ourselves and love ourselves. Now, let me ask you this. This might be going really deep into sort of philosophy and humanity, but what would you see on a large scale of humanity? You talk about teaching, I guess, cultural history, and what do you see looking forward in terms of maybe a means of remediating global self-induced suffering or stress, or maybe even self-deception? So how do we pull back from what I see as where we're heading, which again, there's meaning vacuums, and there's there's consumerism and addiction and things like that. And I know I'm asking you a huge question as we're probably winding this down, but you just, what are your thoughts on that? Like species-wide or globally, do you see methods or means that could be focused on to help us?
That's a big question. And I think the best way I can answer it is we all have our own calling, our own vocation. And some people are called to work in technology to, help our embattled earth and navigate climate change and, reverse some of the extractive, destructive technologies. That's not my calling. I wouldn't be good at it.
Right.
But so everyone needs to follow their calling. And if your calling is authentically to really build in a deep way a piece of heaven in your environment where you're calm, where you're happy, where you're feeling that sense of potential, where the people around you feel uplifted, where you're not attached to things, you're not attached to status, you're not greedy, you're not suffering.
Mm-hmm.
Having little pockets of sanity and love, little bit of like what heaven should look like right now, that's really important. People should feel sorry, there's a train, but people should feel the value and the importance and the urgency of making our lives matter now. So, obviously social change and systemic racism is such a serious issue, and there's so much lost potential, there's so much hurt and harm. And for those of us who identify as white and who benefit from being part of that systemic privilege, we have a lot of self knowledge and exposure to do to dismantle structures of privilege. So living that heaven on earth isn't always comfortable, but making your life intentional is the most important thing that we can do. And then your calling is going to naturally come out, so then maybe you're going to be a 6th grade teacher and your student is going to be the next Martin Luther King or Mahatma Gandhi or Nelson Mandela and really, start a whole revolution. You would have been the teacher that inspired them. Or maybe you're going to do that. But I wouldn't begin to want to solve all the world's problems. But what I want to see is everyone's highest potential activated. And if we start really feeling the urgency of activating each other's potential, then all kinds of things are possible. And if we're only worried about what do I look like and am I doing the best thing and am I on the Forbes list of the 40 under 40 who are changing the world, it's only one way of looking at change and actualization, and that really feeds into a lot of the philosophical views that have led to the harm of the planet and ourselves. So we have to be careful about that, what our career goals or life goals are, and that we're really looking deeply in a way that's nonlinear, because that's I think what's going to help turn a lot of these very destructive patterns around.
So finding navigational aids like empathy, compassion, and understanding connectedness, systems connectedness, is a good place to start, perhaps, with that aspiration to be either a good meaning creation agent or empathy creating agent, something, creating a product through your actions that helps the structure, helps the community. So thank you for that input, because like I said, that's something that, and I don't look at it from a negative perspective, because suffering is a teaching aid. It's it's a tool for redirect and helping us to know what we don't want, and learning by negative experiences is powerful. But again, there's ways, I think, maybe that through awareness we can ratchet some of that down, so that there are, well-being is more of a norm than, as you pointed out, there's a lot of inequity and a lot of disparity going on culturally. So was there anything else you'd like to add relating to either inner strength or big, deep things? I know we've just got a few minutes left, but I'll leave it open for you if there's anything else you'd like to share or add before we wrap it up.
Great. Well, I'm available through innerstrengtheducation.org or theconsciousclassroom.com. And I did want to share one free resource. We just launched our mobile app called Inner Strength, and it's free. So it's on Apple and Google Play. It's designed for teenagers. It's designed for adolescents. I actually know a lot of adults who are using it, and
Nice.
teachers who are using it. And I know some even elementary school students who are using it. So it is a mindfulness app, but it has a little bit more to it along the lines of the things that we teach in our program. And you are welcome to download it, share it with your children, your nieces and nephews, your neighbors. Again, it's free. We're just trying to make these self-care and whole person wellness tools available and accessible, and remove barriers to entry. And as I said, I think that our youth are experiencing a lot of challenges post-pandemic, having been distanced from the structures that provided security and stability. A lot of them are very disappointed in themselves for not being able to maintain good habits. Many have experienced loss of a loved one, or fear of loss of a loved one, or economic insecurity, as many parents were out of work for a time. So it's a good moment to invite them. It's fun, it's colorful, it has healthy competition and leaderboards. And so Inner Strength on Apple and Google Play, or go to innerstrengtheducation.org and you can find the links to download.
Okay, and I will make sure that all of that is included in the description field of this video, so there will be accessibility available for folks to go and discover. And so I want to just say that thank you personally for what you're doing and what you're going to be doing down the road. Again, change making, sense making, and helping ourselves to become greater expression of ourselves. I always like to say that you're doing that work, and I am going to loud praises on you in a non-egoic way, just that Amy Edelstein is doing some incredible work, and I will make sure, as long as I'm around, word of mouth will hopefully steer interested eyes and ears in your direction, because again, I think the work that you and your partners are doing is just absolutely amazing. So I want to say thank you so much for being on my little interview show, and I hope this video that we produced together goes out in the world and develops a life of its own, and has good discovery, and people can benefit from it. So Amy, again, thank you so much. I'm very grateful that we had this conversation today.
Thanks so much. Real pleasure.
And I'll say goodbye to you after we stop recording. But and thank you, viewers on YouTube, for engaging in this conversation with us and watching this. And I wish you all well too. Thank you so much. And so take care, everyone. And Amy, again, much thanks to you.